It's Ed. And today we got a nice bit of ancient trivia. 10 pieces of ancient trivia that you might find very interesting. And with us today, we have our special guest on the channel returning, Thomas Beeple.
Number 1. Tutankhamun's damage may have been posthumous. Okay, you may have heard that Tutankhamun was murdered. Perfectly possible. However, recent years have seen more evidence of mummification, more mummies found, and the previously assumed infallibility, or closer infallibility, of embalmers has been put under serious scrutiny. So it's perfectly possible, in fact, that the damage was done to Tutankhamun's body posthumously and had nothing to do with any kind of murder, misadventure, or any other theory that has sometimes been postulated by historians. Number 2. Staying with King Tutankhamun, his tomb was desecrated by another pharaoh. In the Egyptian times, Tutankhamun had a relatively short reign and was a relatively unknown pharaoh. Sometime later, Pharaoh Ramesses III decided that he liked the spot occupied by Tutankhamun too. And because he didn't care about it anyway, he simply built over it. Time would have the last laugh, however, because many years later robbers came to the tomb. They robbed everything from Ramesses III's tomb, but failed to realise there was another tomb underneath, making Tutankhamun possibly the only pharaoh whose tomb wasn't completely ransacked. Number 3. Herodotus had some very ideas about the Egyptians. The Greek historian Herodotus claims to have visited Egypt. The reason I say claimed is because since ancient times, right until modern academia, there's been some division as to whether he did. There's been some division as to whether he did. One reason for that is that some of the things he said about Egypt seem slightly strange. He claimed, for example, that in Egypt women are in charge. Okay, maybe plausible, even in ancient times. And that they do everything men do. They go out to work while the men stay home and do the weaving. However, the more controversial and difficult claim among these is that he claims in Egypt women stand up to urinate, whereas men are forced to sit down. So yeah, some people really aren't sure if he ever even went there. Number 4. This is Sparta is almost true. The famous scene in the movie 300 where Leonidas hurls a Persian emissary down a well screaming, "This is Sparta!" is actually made up. However, it's not as far from the truth as it may seem. 10 years before Xerxes invaded Greece, his father Darius tried. When Darius invaded Greece, we are told that he sent emissaries to Sparta asking them for earth and water as a sign of homage. The Spartans supposedly took the Persian emissaries to a well, said, "If you want earth and water, you can find it down here," and at this point shut them down the well, just like Leonidas does, although maybe minus that this is Sparta. 5. We do not have any of Socrates' writing. Although remembered as a great philosopher, and studied at length even today, everything we have of Socrates' work was actually recorded by other people. Whether because he didn't write anything himself or because it's lost, we have no original text by Socrates and are relying on what Plato and Xenophon say he said. So we will never be sure whether Socrates said everything he's supposed to, or whether it was just easier for Plato and Xenophon to put their words in a man who had already been killed, so that if anyone got angry, they couldn't really do anything because you can't really execute someone twice. 6. An assassination plot against Alexander the Great was once thwarted because he drunk till dawn. The historian Arrian records that during his campaigns, Alexander fell out with a group of page boys, supposedly because one of them killed an animal that Alexander was hoping to kill himself during a hunt. Alexander reacted angrily by whipping the said page boy, and as a result they got together and decided to kill him. So they waited in Alexander's tent for him to come home from drinking, so that when he staggered home drunk they'd just stab him to death. The only problem there was that Alexander drank till dawn, so they waited all night for nothing. The next morning the truth was exposed and the attempt was over. Number 7. The Spartacus revolt was insignificant in Rome. Although we generally assumed the Spartacus revolt would have been an immense occasion in which the power of Rome was nearly destroyed, to the Romans it was fairly inconsequential. That's partly because they had a specific prejudice, assuming that all slaves and pirates were inferior opponents. As a result, General Crassus was excluded from most Roman military honours for the win because he'd only beaten slaves. In Roman eyes it would be the equivalent today of being the football player whose biggest achievement was scoring the winning goal for England against San Marino. Many decades later, Crassus died campaigning against Parthia in a hope of finally giving himself the military glory that he had not received for killing Spartacus. He would have to leave it to modern Hollywood to give him his status as the general who killed Spartacus, while all the Romans gave him for it was a minor commendation, which essentially says the Senate voted to say thank you. Quite a step down from the parade and pomp and circumstance that would have been part of the Roman triumph he might have liked. 8. Pompeii was a minor area in ancient Rome. Much like Tutankhamun's tomb, Pompeii's status as an archaeological site has elevated it in modern understanding. To the ancient Romans, it was just one of many minor provincial towns. In fact, on one occasion, the orator Cicero ridicules Caesar's attempts to increase the number of senators by suggesting that it would soon be easier to get on the councils of Rome than to get on the council of Pompeii. In other words, gosh, it'll be so easy to get on the council of Rome and it'll be harder in some minor little town we don't care about. Number 9. Those who was about to die salute you came from a fart. If you've watched many Hollywood films, you'll have seen gladiators say, "Those who was about to die salute you." If you've watched many modern podcasts or panel games, you will probably have been told that that's not true. But the one recorded incident of it is quite interesting. Supposedly the Emperor Claudius had assigned a group of men to take part in a mock sea battle as part of some kind of games. As they were about to fight, they all said, "Those who are about to die salute you." Claudius responded, or not. Whether he was being flippant or alluding to the possibility that some fighters might be lucky enough to survive, we'll never know. But the prisoners were sure that he had just handed them a reprieve and refused to fight. This led to Claudius having to send troops in to force them to fight. We're also told that they all died. And 10. Gladiator was actually the opposite. We're all used to historical inaccuracies in films, but the opening of Gladiator actually reversed what actually happened. Marcus Aurelius never died from any kind of murder. He died naturally from a long-term illness. And whilst no one can ever rule out poison with anyone who died before about 1950, there's never been any serious evidence or suggestion of it from contemporary sources. And given he had the illness as long as he had, it's perfectly possible it could have done for him. However, the biggest irony of Gladiator is that Gladiator suggests he was murdered because he was about to break precedent and not hand the throne to his son. In fact, Marcus Aurelius followed 4 emperors in succession who had all handed the throne not to their next of kin, but to the most able or capable individual they could find. So in fact, Marcus Aurelius did indeed break precedent in his succession, not by not picking his son, but by picking him. Thank you. That is 10 amazing facts about the ancients.
Thank you for joining us today. Hey, and thank you to Tom for being our ancient historian person who's really clever about ancient stuff. And just like to say to everyone watching, it was lovely having you here.